Senator Groh, when you're ready, you may begin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. Before I begin, I'd like to accept the proposed committee amendment deleting the phrase of human rights organizations in the bill and just keeping it at the State Department as a source of countries with human rights abuses. Colleagues, each year Californians consume about 1.8 million barrels of oil every day. That's roughly 522 million barrels each year, but only 135 million, or 25%, is produced here in the state of California by Californian workers for California consumers. The rest of the oil is imported mostly from foreign countries and transported here on huge tanker ships. The amount Californians spend on imported oil is enormous. If oil is priced at $100 a barrel, Californians can pay about $50 billion a year to import oil that they need and use every single day. And colleagues, that's just the raw cost. It doesn't calculate in the transportation from port of origin to port of destination or the refining cost. Truly, the state's current energy policy doesn't make any sense. When the supply is needed, but we're using foreign countries to produce that supply for us. With foreign oil imports, we've placed California's energy security in the hands of countries that are actively hostile to California's values when it comes to human rights, labor rights, or environmental rights. The top 5 countries that we do business with account for 2/3 of the foreign oil we import, which is, like I said, about 405,000 barrels every single day, or 148 million barrels a year. These countries are Ecuador, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Brazil, and Colombia, with Brazil, Ecuador, and Colombia over the rainforest. Currently, California's number one source of foreign crude oil is Ecuador, which has been strongly criticized by environmental and indigenous groups for its practice to clear cutting and bulldozing down the rainforest, the Amazon rainforest. 4 of the top 6 countries that we import oil from are actively destroying the most biodiverse ecosystem on the planet to send their oil here to Californians because we desperately need it every day. And they don't adhere to the strict environmental regulatory processes that we have here in California. One state, this state, California, imports half of its crude oil that's produced in Ecuador. That means 53% of oil produced in Ecuador comes here to this state. California's decision to import rather than produce oil here means that we're financing more than just the destruction of the Amazon rainforest. Indigenous peoples in the South America are routinely displaced by their land. It's contaminated, and the leaders are threatened or even killed. Like I said, we don't have that problem here in California because of the way that we oversee the process. Just this last February, an indigenous leader in Ecuador was murdered. The killing is believed to be linked to the community's fight to block Ecuador's state-owned oil companies from expanding its oil drilling in the regions to export more oil to California. Again, the money that we're sending to these governments directly finances this type of activity. Saudi Arabia and Iraq are annually highlighted by U.S. State Department for the deplorable human rights violations in these 2 countries. We import 49 million barrels of oil every year from Saudi Arabia. Colleagues, this is a country where being part of the LGBT community is punishable by death, and we import and pay for 49 million barrels of oil every year from them. Women cannot drive in this country, and they are not allowed to vote, and torture is used as a punishment of crimes. All of this imported oil brought to California by 600 tanker ships a year. The tankers spew millions of pounds of carbon into the atmosphere every year with bunker fuel they consume and the power that they need to offload this oil. What's interesting about this is that when we asked CARB for the information, we couldn't believe that the output of carbon emissions was so low. But what we found out is that CARB is not calculating, and the calculation is not being calculated from point of destination or point of origin to point of destination. It's only calculated on the 12-mile coastline of California into the California ports. So all of the emissions that are spewed across the ecosystem, when you look at its point of origin, are not counted toward the emission output. I understand, and we learned that again from Vessel Finder. If you follow these ships, they'll circle outside our 12-mile radius until they can come into the port. And it's interesting that they bring those oil tankers into the port when the price increases, and they're able to offload their oil for a higher price. I understand that many of my colleagues see the energy future way different than I do. But today and for the foreseeable future, Californians are still consuming 1.8 million of barrels of oil every single day that we desperately need. That's not because it's used just for gas in California to put in our cars, but more than 6,000 products are made from petroleum, such as shoes, phones, toothbrushes, eyeglasses, heart valves, and disposable diapers. And most plastic products have a petroleum byproduct. Members, it takes 35 gallons of oil to make the tires for a Tesla, and even more to make the plastics and the wire insulation and other parts that require oil. Much of the oil we import could be replaced by California in-state producers, providing California jobs if we were allowed to expand oil production. And I know that's something that seems so evil here, but Californians consume this oil, and we should produce it here under the policies and the environmental regulatory processes that we impose on these companies. Much of the oil that we have here, our producers that we produce here, we operate under the most stringent and strictest environmental and regulatory rules in the world. The most devastating environmental impacts to human rights violations mentioned previously in my conversation or my presentation does not happen here in California. Oil in Kern County and the district that I represent is extracted from what's essentially a desert. There's no Amazon rainforest to destroy, and the jobs created in the industry average about $123,000 a year, where we employ 55% people of color, 22% second chancers, women, and veterans. SB 15 would simply implore the legislature to prohibit the import of crude oil to California if the source of oil is a foreign nation with demonstrated human rights abuses, like Saudi Arabia, which imprisons, beats, and hangs the LGBT community, and which does not even allow women to drive, or a foreign nation with environmental standards that are lower than those that we require on our oil producers here in California. The measure would also require the Air Resources Board to report on its website the amount of particulate matter, carbon, released into the air from tanker ship emissions in an effort to highlight the air quality impacts from this state's dependence on foreign oil from point of origin to point of destination. Let me show you some quick examples of what this bill would address. I have a couple of pictures here. Let me get them out. Apologize to the delay, Mr. Chair. That's right, I got it. Thank you. I don't. These are indigenous tribes. So this is an indigenous tribe that has conflict in Ecuador. They're constantly trying to get the government to stop producing oil there. But because California consumes 53% of Ecuador's oil, they can't stop drilling there. We don't have this issue in the state of California. This is an oil spill in the Amazon rainforest. Now, we've had oil leakages and spills in Kern County. Obviously, we're an oil field, but we immediately process those spills and clean them up. Our oil spills don't look like this, and it definitely doesn't invade people's homes and properties. Just another oil field. This one is in Colombia. It's invaded a river. We don't have riverbed. We don't have rivers in the farmlands we do, but we don't have rivers in the oil fields. They're desert communities. We have thousands of wells in the same location on the same water aquifers, and it's different than how it's produced in foreign countries. This is basically a Kern County oil field. If you haven't gone to Kern County, there's no rivers, there's no Amazon rainforest. They operate right next to farmlands, and they're all within the same distance of the same aquifer. Most oil wells are on the same aquifer that operate within the same area. It's a different process that we use here, and I'm just asking you guys to recognize the safe and most environmental strictest process that we have in the world that produces the oil that we need every day. With me to testify in favor of this bill is Mike Umbro, who's going to share a little bit about his expertise in this industry.
You have 2 minutes, please.
Thank you. Mike Umbro, Premier Resource Management, lifelong San Diego resident. Fresh data from the CEC. In 2022, Iraq was California's largest source of foreign oil, supplying over 68 million barrels to our state. Iraq's oil revenue from California exceeded $6.8 billion. SB 15 is the first of many necessary steps to ensure a level playing field for California's inelastic oil market. It's time we hold OPEC accountable. In October 21, Governor Newsom declared a state of emergency after 25,000 gallons of crude oil leaked into the waters of Orange County. The oil was promptly cleaned up, and cargo ships responsible for the spill paid a $97 million settlement. That same year, Iraq flared 630 billion cubic feet of natural gas, second in the world only to Russia, 5 times California's annual gas production. Relative to CO2, methane is 80 times more effective at trapping heat in the atmosphere. This wasteful flaring equates to 12 million gallons of oil energy equivalent per day leaking into our atmosphere. The people of Iraq inhale the equivalent of 480 Orange County oil spills every single day. We need SB 15. In 2022, Iraqi Environmental Minister Hassim al-Falahi acknowledged that air pollution from this rampant flaring is the main reason for increases in local cancer rates, which are up over 20% since 2015, where villages are polluted with benzene, CO2, methane, and black soot. The people of Iraq are dying from leukemia and other cancers linked to unmitigated flaring less than 800 feet from their front doors. California banned the wasteful flaring of natural gas in 1939 and recently implemented 3,200-foot setbacks. We need SB 15 to document these Iraqi oil fields, labeled modern sacrifice zones by the United Nations. Voting no on SB 15 grants tacit approval to the ongoing import of these barrels without so much as a warning label
We have 2
to
minutes,
the people of Iraq and unsuspecting consumers of California.
Thank you. Next witness, just your name and your organization.
Sean Walentine from the California Independent Petroleum Association, representing 350 independent oil and natural gas producers, service and supply companies, and mineral rights owners in strong support of the bill, and we're proud to do the work and provide California with the crude you need.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair and members, Paul Yoder on behalf of the Boards of Supervisors in Kern and Fresno counties in support of the bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other witnesses in support of SB 15? Hearing and seeing none, now we'll go to opposition. Any witnesses here in opposition? Seeing none, moderator, let's go to our phone lines for witnesses in support or in opposition of SB 15.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And if you wish to speak in support or opposition of this bill, please press 1 then 0 at this time.
No, I didn't. You don't need it.
And Mr. Chair, we have no one queued up to speak at this time.
Thank you. We'll bring it back to the committee. Are there any questions or concerns in regards to this measure? Senator Stern.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Congratulations on your baby,
Thank
sir.
you so much, Senator. It's good first day back. My question for you was about whether this bill would only apply to data about international sources, or if we're also talking about, say, emissions from a Texas oil field or Pennsylvania or other places. Do you have a sense of, would the bill sort of apply everything being imported into California? Would we be tracking that air quality data, or only the stuff coming in from international sources?
It's coming from international sources. I can get an expert to testify, but I don't believe we import any oil from Texas. Is that correct?
California does not import any crude oil from any other state
state.
Alaska, and that's a very small amount.
So Alaskan oil, though, would be included in this or excluded?
I can include that, sir. That would be a very important point if you would like me to do that. I'd be glad to do that, but we don't, when you talk about Texas or other states,
Sure.
California doesn't import any oil production from any other state. There's no mechanism to bring it here. We don't have pipelines. We import all of our oil that we don't produce here from foreign countries. Ecuador being the number one.
I would appreciate it if you'd consider that going forward, because I actually think there's some space here on bipartisan agreement, and I think that especially having sort of an even-handed approach for everything beyond our borders to know what we can figure out and make some decisions. Actually might make some space. I think both in natural gas and in oil, there's a lot we don't know that happens beyond our borders. So, thanks for that.
Thank you, sir.
All right, Senator Newman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Senator Grove, I appreciate this bill. Clearly, there is space for bipartisan agreement because this bill passed in identical form last year, I believe, by 35-0.
Yes.
And so you have been making, I think, a very clear case for consideration of the impact of the choices that we make above and beyond what we do in this state. And I think it makes eminent sense, right? So glad to support the bill. There are other conversations we obviously need to have about decarbonization, but your point, which you make so compellingly, as many chances you get, about oil being a fungible commodity that we get from wherever we get it, and the globe being somewhat larger than California, we are not necessarily living up to our ideals if we're causing ancillary damage to other communities, to other environmental systems, simply by not producing that oil here in California. The data, I think in support of that, is important. We should collect that data and have that conversation. So glad to support the bill, and I'd ask Beata as a co-author as you move forward.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Any further discussion or debate? All right. Senator Newman? You're making the motion? All right. We have a due pass as amended to Appropriations Committee. Senator Grove, would you like to close?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Colleagues, the comments that were made, like specifically banning flaring in 1939 in the state of California, that still goes on in a country that that we purchase oil from. It doesn't have to be like that. California workers are ready to meet the demand for California's oil. There's more than 1,400 drilling permits that are awaiting approval at CalGEM, and 55 UIC permits. And what's interesting is that Kern County oil field photo that I showed, a lot of those oil drilling permits are on that same field, that exact same field in that exact same location where we're drilling for oil now, but we just can't get the permits, which doesn't make any sense if it's in the same location on the same water aquifer in the same field. And we could be producing that oil here. We're about 100,000 barrels short per day that we used to produce under the previous administration, the Brown administration, than we do now because of what's happened to our Kern County oil fields and the permit process. We are losing more workers and more oil produced here for the consumption of Californians, and we're importing more oil from, like I said, organizations and countries that have no environmental impact or have no environmental quality regulatory environment like we have here in the state of California. And I would just respectfully ask for an aye vote.
Thank you. We have a due pass as amended to Appropriations Committee. We have a motion by Senator Newman, and the amendment state delete reference to or by human rights organizations and the intent language regarding having the CEC monitor foreign countries that export oil to California. Consultant, please call the roll.
Bradford?
Aye.
Bradford, aye. Dally? Ashby? Becker? Aye. Becker, aye. Caballero? Dodd? Aye. Dodd, aye. Durazo? Aye. Durazo, aye. Eggman? Aye. Eggman, aye. Gonzalez? Grove?
Aye.
Grove, aye. McGuire? Min? Aye. Min, aye. Newman? Aye. Newman, aye. Rubio? Ciarto? Skinner? Aye. Skinner, aye. Stern? Aye. Stern, aye. Wilk?
Aye.
Wilk, aye. 11.
That bill has 11 votes. We'll leave the roll open for absent members to add on. Next
you,
up is
Mr.
file item 3 by Senator Padilla, SB 619.